saying the moderation mentality rules. Okay, we're also going to talk in this chapter about minerals. Of the 92 known minerals, at least 21 of them are necessary for biochemical processes in humans. Minerals differ from other nutrients in that they remain intact during digestion and they don't change in structure when performing functions. Major minerals are those that the body needs in relatively large amounts, and then we have trace minerals that are known biological functions in humans but are necessary only in smaller amounts. And we'll talk about those in a minute. So basically, like vitamins, you only need very small amounts, but they do perform very important jobs, which is why we need a variety of foods to obtain those. The percentage of minerals that is absorbed varies tremendously. The minerals in animal foods tend to be absorbed a little bit better than those in plant foods, and that's primarily due to the fiber and other substances that actually bind those minerals. Like we mentioned before, the word bioavailability, that's the degree to which a nutrient is absorbed and available to be used in the body. So what you're eating it with and where the mineral comes from affects the bioavailability. Unlike the vitamins, minerals are not destroyed in food preparation, but they are considered water soluble. So here's our chart where we have our major and our trace minerals. And you can see some of them are more familiar with than others. Calcium, chloride, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, sodium, sulfur. The ones that have an asterisk, calcium, magnesium, and potassium, and then also iron, are really of concern because many Americans aren't getting adequate amounts of those. Minerals can be toxic when consumed in excess, which may be only slightly higher than the recommended level. And again, that's the reason why we get our minerals from food and not take vitamins. Excessive intake of minerals can affect whether another mineral is absorbed or excreted. So, like I mentioned in the last slide, there's a certain minerals that Americans aren't getting enough of, and iron has become underconsumed by some population groups, primarily because of women menstruating and possibly losing blood, and then also people have reduced their consumption of red meat. So the availability of heme iron that's more bioavailable is not as great. So let's look at some of the major minerals in our diet. Calcium and phosphorus first. Calcium is the most abundant mineral in the body, which 99% of it is in your bones and your teeth. The thing to remember is that bones are constantly being rebuilt. I think a lot of adults tend to think that dairy products, especially milk, is only for children. We should all realize that we have an opportunity to constantly rebuild our bones if we replenish our calcium intake. Up to 90% of peak bone mass is acquired by age 18. Bone mass grows until you're about 25. After menopause, women experience sometimes more severe bone loss, which can lead to osteopenia and then osteoporosis. Bone mass is actually lost in the normal process of aging. It's not something we can prevent. It happens in aging, but it can be preserved with adequate calcium and vitamin D intake. Because as I mentioned in the last chapter, vitamin D helps your body use the calcium. So calcium deficiency is one of the factors associated with the onset of the osteoporosis. It's typically more common in women than men, but 1 in every 3 people over the age of 65 suffers from osteoporosis, which is adult bone loss. And that can result in fractures and loss of height and also pain from compressed vertebrae. So it's a really big concern for people, and you can do something about it when you're younger. Calcium helps to squeeze and relax your muscles and also to send and receive nerve signals, and it's also really important for blood clotting. Phosphorus, on the other hand, is a part of DNA and it's needed for growth. and it helps the acid-base balance in our body cells. So where do we get calcium and phosphorus? You can see all of them are mostly dairy products. Calcium is found in milk and milk products, and that's primarily where we get the majority of our calcium. Otherwise, it's very difficult to get it because there's other calcium sources, such as foods that are fortified with calcium, legumes, several different greens, some of your nuts. But again, they're not made as bioavailable as the dairy products. Calcium can also be toxic when taken in large doses. So it's important to, get a recommendation from your doctor if you're considering taking calcium. You can also talk it over with a registered dietitian. Your body cannot absorb more than 500 milligrams at a time. So you never want to take 1,500 milligrams because your body's not going to be able to absorb that much. And that's the beauty of using dairy products or food to get your calcium, because you're not eating it all at once. You're eating it throughout the day. When we talk about the amount of calcium in food, the average intake per day should be about 1,000 milligrams. Now that goes up for women postmenopausal, but how much do you get in a day? If you're drinking or using evaporated skim milk, that's about 742 milligrams of calcium in a cup. A half a cup of ricotta cheese has about 334 milligrams, but most of your dairy products, whether they're non-fat, low-fat, whole milk, or buttermilk, they contain about 300 milligrams, the same as yogurt. So think about how you can utilize these products in your cooking as opposed to just drinking milk or having milk with cereal. You can do things like marinate your fish in buttermilk, or you can substitute plain unflavored Greek yogurt for mayonnaise in your dressings. So there's a lot of ways of incorporating nutrition by addition and getting that calcium in that's very difficult for a lot of adults to consume. So this chart just reviews the functions, the major sources, and also just some special notes that calcium is extremely important for building and rebuilding bones and teeth. And it's also very important for regulating blood pressure because of how it affects the muscles in the heart. So calcium is extremely important, and we get it primarily in our dairy products. So be creative in adding some of that to your meal planning. Phosphorus, again, it's needed for building and rebuilding bones and teeth, and it's a part of your DNA. And just like dairy products, it's also contained in your milk products. Phosphorus is the second most abundant mineral in the body. It helps build and renew bones in your teeth, and it's generally found in the same calcium-rich foods that we talked about in the last slide. What about magnesium? Magnesium, about 50% of it in the body is in your bones. In your blood, magnesium keeps bones and teeth strong. It helps muscles and nerves to function properly, and it also helps the immune system. Magnesium also seems to be very influential in regulating blood pressure and preventing strokes. So magnesium is a really important nutrient mineral in the diet that is found in things like beans and nuts, whole grains, breads, cereals, milk, and yogurt. When you're eating refined foods, such as white bread and that, it's generally a little bit lower. It's present in many foods, and it occurs in small amounts, and that's why, again, it's important to get a good variety. Here's some pictures of some sources of magnesium in the diet and a summary of what we just talked about. It's definitely one of the nutrients that's underconsumed, but by eating a wide variety of real food in your diet daily, you can raise that consumption. Another really important mineral to discuss is sodium. The major source of sodium in the diet is highly processed food and also salt, which is a compound made up of sodium and chloride. Sodium, potassium, and chloride are collectively referred to as electrolytes because when they're dissolved in body fluids, they separate into positive or negative charged particles. Electrolytes are extremely important because they help to maintain a good balance of fluids and also keep your blood neutral. So you can't survive without your electrolytes being in balance, and that's why when you look at athletes, they're always very concerned about replacing electrolytes after heavily perspiring. Sodium is also needed for muscle contraction and for transmission of nerve impulses. So it's necessary. When we look at where it comes from, I mentioned highly processed food. Those people who consume more processed food and fast food as opposed to whole food, generally that's the major concern. It's also contained in salt, which is 40% sodium and 60% chloride. And 1 teaspoon of salt has about 2,300 milligrams, which is the recommended allowance to use as a maximum per day. If you're over 50, the government recommends 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day, which is much less than a teaspoon. So you can see that sodium is used as a compound in preserving food. It's used as a flavor enhancer. People pick up the salt shaker. So you can see why we're getting, way too much sodium in our diet. Now, from a culinary perspective, salt enhances flavor and texture and like I mentioned, serves as a preservative. But high amounts of it are found in those processed foods, and also chefs love to go heavy-handed on salt. So it's really important to think about, where you're getting it in your personal diet and how you're contributing to the sodium, consumption of your constituents. Most of the sodium in the diet comes from those processed foods and restaurant foods. So it's really important to think about how can I get creative and flavor food without using an excessive amount of salt. So what are those foods that are high in sodium? Anything cured and smoked, such as your meat and fish, bacon, sausage, ham, hot dogs, luncheon meats, many of your cheeses, especially those that are highly processed like American slices, your snack foods, anything prepared in brine, pickles, olives, canned goods, instant soups, bouillon cubes. I mean, the list goes on and on. Frozen convenience foods, prepared mixes, salad dressings, condiments such as soy sauce, seasonings like garlic salt and onion salt, MSG, Worcestershire sauce, horseradish, ketchup, etc., etc. There's no limit to the foods that are high in sodium. The foods that are low in sodium are those that are fresh, frozen, and canned fruits, fresh or frozen vegetables without sauces. If they have sauces, then they're going to have more sodium as a preservative. Fresh meat, poultry, seafood, grains and legumes that are not processed or canned. So, for instance, if you are using beans and cooking them from scratch, there's no salt unless you add it. But if you're opening up a can, they're highly salted, so it's important to rinse them. So there's a lot of sodium in our food supply, which can create, some health concerns. But before we go there, I want to look at some of a diet, several different diets that you can compare that have differences in sodium content. What I always like to look at too is the number of foods that you have on the low sodium diet as compared to the high sodium diet. Whole food is on the left. It generally has little sodium compared to the ones on the right. Like, for instance, the frozen French bread pizza with extra cheese, with a Caesar salad and dressing and Parmesan cheese, as opposed to a piece of, fresh roasted chicken breast, a baked potato, some veggies, a salad, so much lower in sodium. So really, really begin to think about that a little bit more, because there's a real scare, health scare in our society with high blood pressure these days. 1 in 3 people have high blood pressure, and 1 in 3 people have hypertension, which is high blood pressure. And those that are currently diagnosed with high blood pressure, only probably about 50% of those are being controlled. And many times it's their diet. These next couple slides just show you the comparison of a low sodium diet with all its whole food choices versus a very high sodium diet, including a lot of highly processed foods. Americans overconsume sodium, like I mentioned, which is a very big risk for blood pressure. And blood pressure problems are a risk for heart disease, stroke, and kidney disease. So you can see the trickle-down effect of consuming more sodium than necessary. Now, the dietary guidelines state that most people should reduce their sodium intake to less than 2,400 milligrams a day. Now, this slide suggests that the actual intake of Americans is about 3,500, and I suspect that it's a lot of times greater than that, like maybe even 4,000 to 8,000, depending on, what you consume. Because many food choices that are available today in the fast food industry have a ton of sodium. And the recommendation based on the dietary guidelines should actually be less than 1,500 for people who are over 50. As a dietitian, I realize that it's almost impossible to achieve that when 1 cup of a canned soup is 1,000 milligrams. So that's why it's important to just be cognizant of where you're using it in your cooking and meal planning. So how do we lower sodium intake? Obviously by, promoting more unprocessed or minimally processed foods. Encouraging more whole food, more fruits and vegetables, frozen veggies without a lot of sauces, learning to enhance food with spices and herbs, making your own dressings so you don't have to, have a sodium preservative involved. The good thing about sodium is that things are very salty, so that when you lower your salt intake or sodium intake, things taste very salty. So it's easier to lower your threshold once you reduce your intake of salt or sodium. The preference for salty taste definitely changes, and it's easier to give it up. One of the very important diets that is out there, actually the U.S. News and World Report ranks diets every year in January, and they come out with a report that shows which diets are very beneficial for overall health, for keeping blood pressure low, for keeping blood sugar intact, for helping with weight loss. The DASH diet stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension, and this particular diet emphasizes whole food. It emphasizes a diet that's high in vegetables. It includes your dry beans, fruits, low-fat dairy products, and whole grains. It doesn't have a lot of sugar, sugar-sweetened beverages, a lot of excess meat, and also sodium. So that's a very healthy diet you need to be aware of. In 2018, it was ranked #1, and that was for 8 years running. So the DASH diet is really a healthful approach to eating. I hate that it's called diet. I wish it said DASH lifestyle, because that's exactly what it is. So if you're wanting more information on that, you can look at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health website, which has a lot of good resources on the DASH diet. Your professor has actually co-authored 2 books on the DASH diet, and I also developed 150 recipes that are part of the DASH diet for dummies and the Hypertension Cookbook for Dummies. So it's very near and dear to my heart. So when you're looking at this little quiz here, it's very easy to after our discussion, to identify which foods are higher in sodium. And you can kind of go through the list. Obviously, the foods that are higher in processing are generally higher in sodium. Okay, what about potassium? Potassium is an electrolyte, just like sodium, that's found mainly in the fluid inside individual body cells. And along with sodium, it helps to maintain fluid balance. It helps to contract muscles, even the heart muscle, and it also helps to send nerve impulses. Where do we get potassium? Primarily unprocessed whole foods. So again, it's very easy to get potassium in the diet if you're considering or eating a whole food diet. All of your whole foods, especially your fruits and veggies. But think about things like dried fruit. You see in the slide raisins. Anytime you take any food and you dehydrate it, it becomes more concentrated in nutrients. A lot of people are turned off because they think it's higher in sugar or higher in calories, and that may be the case, and that's why it's important to consume a smaller quantity. So a quarter of a cup of raisins is equivalent to 15 large grapes. But in the aftermath, you're getting, yes, a more concentrated source of calories, but even more concentrated source of potassium and also calcium. Generally speaking, Americans get adequate amounts of potassium in their diet if you have a variety of foods in your diet. So this slide again just reiterates the sources, the functions, and that this particular nutrient may be underconsumed if people aren't getting a varied diet. Another important mineral is iron. Iron is a key component of hemoglobin, which is a part of your red blood cells that carries oxygen in cells to the body. It's also a part of myoglobin, which is a muscle protein that stores and carries oxygen in the muscles that are used to contract. Iron is also needed for the body to produce energy. And some iron is in the liver and also other places. The best sources of iron are meat. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people aren't getting adequate amounts of iron in their diet, especially if they've given up a lot of red meat. Okay, so where do we get iron? All the different sources. And again, if you eat a varied diet, you're getting a good source of iron. But one thing to remember is some foods are better absorbed than others. Most iron in animal products is called heme iron, and it really is absorbed much better than the iron in plant food, which is non-heme. And I mention that because a lot of people think it's bad or not as good to have red meat in the diet, when in reality, it actually performs better. It absorbs the iron in those foods, absorb better than the iron in plant food. But irregardless of whether you're eating animal or plant food, it's important to have a vitamin C source with those iron choices because that increases your absorption of the mineral. And this is something that I want you to remember, and not only for the purposes of a quiz or test, but also because it's important in your meal planning. The presence of vitamin C in a meal increases the non-heme iron absorption. So think about what we normally put with different foods. If you're serving a steak, what do we normally serve with it? 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a potato, which is high in vitamin C. So there you go. You are increasing the bioavailability of the iron. What happens when you have, say, a spinach salad that has a lot of iron in it? It may not be as readily available to the body, but because of what you're putting with that salad, let's say tomatoes, mandarin oranges, a citrus vinaigrette. All those things are going to enhance your ability to absorb the iron from the spinach. So absorption is an important key thing to think about when we're talking about iron mineral. Iron deficiency, it's only about 20% of the iron is really absorbed. So some people do have problems with iron deficiency anemia when their stores become severely depleted, and it surfaces as a problem with fatigue and decreased performance and also decreased immune function. So, many times doctors are going to check your blood for iron deficiency anemia and possibly supplement. And that's the only time that I would really consider supplementation of iron is if I had my blood work done and I knew that a doctor recommended it. So here's once again, our functions of iron, our sources of iron, and then also other tips. Another mineral, two minerals, are your zinc and iodine. Zinc is in every cell in the body. It's actually considered a cofactor, which is a substance that's necessary for the activity of an enzyme. So again, it's a helper. And that's for nearly 100 enzymes. And some of the functions are that it helps to make DNA, that it's really important for proper immune function and wound healing, and it's also extremely important for growth and development and also for taste perception. So zinc is an important mineral that's necessary in small amounts. So where do you get it? Primarily in protein foods, especially shellfish, meat, and poultry, but you do get it from other foods such as legumes and nuts and dairy and fortified cereals. And once again, here's your little summary. What about iodine? Iodine, the primary way that we obtain iodine is through iodized salt. And that's why when someone asks about salt use in their diet, it's important not to eliminate altogether iodized salt in lieu of sea salt or kosher salt, because this is the primary area you're getting your iodine. Iodine is also contained in, fish, and at one time, iodine was so low in the American diet, and that's the main reason why they supplemented it into the salt product. Iodine is part of two important hormones that maintain a normal metabolic rate in your body, and it's really essential for normal metabolism, normal growth and development. Back in the day when we weren't getting enough iodine, people were having a problem with goiters. So that's why they decided to, supplement iodine into the salt. So for a great summary of all of the minerals we discussed, their functions, food sources, and special notes about each mineral is listed on pages 218 and 219 of your textbook. So that ends our discussion on minerals. At the end of this chapter, there's a culinary focus. And today's culinary focus is on nuts and seeds. They're very versatile and they're very nutritious ingredients. In the past, many times we discouraged the use of those primarily because they contain a lot of fat. The message here is that they're very rich in monounsaturated fats and possibly polyunsaturated fats, but they are higher in calories, so you have to use them wisely. But they pack a big punch in terms of vitamins and minerals, along with fiber and protein. And so it's important to utilize them. Now, if you're looking for non-seafood products that contain omega-3 fatty acids, walnuts and flax seeds are very rich. So those are really good choices if you're looking for a particular seed and when you can't get the omega-3 fats from seafood. Roasting and sauteing them also enhance flavor and also extract the oil. It also helps to give you a different texture once they're cooled. So there's a lot of things you can do with nuts and seeds. But because of the heavy fat content, they do become rancid easily. and have to be stored properly and, not kept for longer than 6 months. They can be used in cooking. They can be used in salads as a protein source, as an extra added flavor, as some texture and fiber. So there's a lot of things that you can do with nuts and seeds. In the case of flax seeds, you have to grind them to get the benefit of the omega-3, and enhancing the flavor of oatmeal and casseroles and soups and things like that. So nuts and seeds are a very good way to add nutrition. And there are a few pictures of some of the more popular nuts and seeds. Nuts are also used in different products to just add a lot of dimension and character. And again, you have to consider the calorie source if that's a concern. So anyway, that ends your chapter 7 today, and I hope those culinary tips were beneficial and help clarify some of the uses of nuts and seeds. So until next time, be sure to participate in your discussion boards and extra reading in some of the handouts that are provided in your modules. Thank you.